Mr. Stearns, for what purpose do you seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Is that amendment to this title too?
That's correct, and I believe it's been in.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Mr. Stearns of Florida. Strike Section 204.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me say to my colleagues on the majority side, when I had an amendment that was talking about labeling of utility bills to find what the cost would be for renewable energy and to see how much it would go up because of the implementation of this bill, a lot of people on the other side said no, they didn't want to have that labeling. Well, now I think you could support this amendment. I say this a little bit humorously because what this amendment does is delete a section of the manager's amendment which calls on a detailed building energy performance labeling program. Just to give you a little bit of idea of what the manager's amendment says, it talks about not later than 90 days after the date of enactment of this piece of legislation, the administrator, which is the EPA, shall provide to Congress as well as to the Secretary of Energy and the Office of Management and Budget a report identifying all principal building types, this is in the United States of America, for which statistically significant energy performance data exists, to serve as a basis of measurement protocols and labeling requirements for achieved building energy performance. Well, this section goes on quite a bit, and it talks about all this complex matter of setting up labels that you can put on every house in America so that it will be identified whether it is energy conservation, energy efficient. So what my amendment does is eliminate this EPA regulation, which is basically establishing an Energy Star labeling on new and existing homes. Now think about that. All the existing homes in America will have to have this brand new Energy Star. Now, this is an amendment that's supported by the National Association of Realtors. I have a letter from them, Mr. Chairman, and I ask unanimous consent that the letter from the National Association of Realtors be made part of the record, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully, I ask this be made part of the record. The letter.
Without objection, that'll be the order.
Okay. Which outlines in detail their objection to this portion of the manager's amendment. You know, frankly, my colleagues, if you have an older home and they put this Energy Star on it and it says your home ain't good, your home will be stigmatized as not only less energy efficient in an older property, but it's going to reduce the value of your home. Now, reducing the value of your home at a time when many homeowners have seen their equity and their retirement savings vanish is not in the best, in my view, the best means of action, and we should not put forward this section because in 90 days the Secretary of Energy and the EPA are going to identify every home in America existing and try to put this labels on it. Now, labels do not necessarily save energy. Home improvements do. So let's say you get this label. Then immediately your house is degraded and it's lost value. You don't have the money because you're unemployed, or you don't have the money because you lost money in your 401k. So you're going to read the label as a buyer, and you're going to say, I'm not going to take that house, whereas it might not scare you away otherwise. Consumers would then have to voluntarily take the next step and act on the data that the EPA and the Secretary of Energy have come up with to install these energy-saving measures. And it's going to have to be done voluntarily. They won't have the money. There's no assurance that the buyers will install these measures once they successfully use the label at the closing to negotiate their home by discounting the price. I just think this is not the way to go. It's hugely bureaucratic, and the people on that side talked about my amendment when I talked about determining how much the renewables would cost on our utility bills. They talked about the bureaucracy and so forth. This is going to be very bureaucratic, and I'm not sure there's data available to identify every single home in America to do this. Because the energy profile of a home varies dramatically from one to the next. It might be a house of historical, classical nature, and it might not be. There's so many variables involved. And so that's why I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and it's supported by the National Association of Realtors. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. Further debate on this amendment?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Harmon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I first want to say that our colleague Jim Matheson offered an excellent amendment, which we have accepted by voice vote. It was intended to meet some of the concerns that have been offered by the realtor group about building labeling, and I think it was a responsible amendment, and I'm very happy that it will become part of the base text. In this case, however, Mr. Stearns, I think that adjustments have already been made to the base text, which go a long way to meeting the objections of the realtors. I'm sorry that they don't support what is now in the bill, but I just want to remind us what is in the bill and what changes have been made, and speak in opposition to the Stearns amendment. First of all, buildings represent 39% of annual U.S. energy use. That's a big deal, and so it matters that we make them as efficient as possible. Second of all, the underlying text creates a national labeling model. It's optional, rating buildings' energy efficiency, one that would make it easy to count carbon and energy costs similar to a nutrition label. I look at nutrition labels, and if I'm buying a new home, I would like to look at that label as well. The realtors are very concerned that the program would be mandatory, and their concerns were met. The program is voluntary. States can opt in or not. It is basically a consumer right-to-know amendment, and the other side has been all about the little guy getting hurt. I think consumers should know the efficiency of places they are purchasing, and also they should have the opportunity to save money on their energy bills because they buy more efficient or rent more efficient structures. So let me conclude that by saying that I think consumers deserve as much information as possible. This allows them to, those who want energy efficient homes to purchase those. Sellers may not only improve curb appeal, but also improve energy efficiency in the homes that they are going to sell. I think this takes us in the right direction, and it will make a huge improvement in our climate situation. So I urge rejection of the Stearns Amendment and applaud the committee and the staff for accommodating the concerns of the realtors in the base text.
Will the gentlelady yield? Will the gentlelady yield
please?
just for a second?
Would gentlelady yield?
Well, let me yield to Mr. Stearns and then Mr. Markey.
I think the Matheson Amendment was applicable to Section 201, had nothing to do with 204, just to clarify.
You're right, but it had to do with buildings, and so you're right. It doesn't have to do with
Air,
this specific.
space, and material. Yes. Okay.
I thank the gentlelady. Buildings are responsible for 40% of greenhouse gas emissions. They 70% of electricity in the United States is consumed in buildings. And this is a very good amendment. This is a voluntary program that we're talking about, a voluntary program which empowers states to adopt measures that will make building energy efficiency and building energy costs transparent. It provides education and incentives to support building energy transparency. But again, let me say this. I can't repeat it enough. This is a voluntary program that we're voting on, and if a state does not want to participate, that's their choice. Yeah. But it's voluntary, and I thank the gentlelady for her leadership on it.
Mr. Chairman, just reclaiming my time for just a few seconds here. There are prototype programs already in operation in the U.S. that have been peer-reviewed and are supported by builders as well as state and federal governments. So it's clear that such a program can be accurate and effective in providing information, and there are established programs in Europe that do what the base text seeks to do. So I think we are making a big contribution here, and consumers will thank us for it, and I don't think that realtors are inconvenienced by this opt-in program.
Will the gentlelady yield for one more?
Well, I have 30 seconds. Sure, I yield.
I can use it. When you go to page 276, and Mr. Markey and yourself have indicated it's voluntary, and it says a state may become eligible. Well, when the states look at this and they realize that they're going to get money and they're going to get federal support, there are incentives for the states to adopt this, because there's going to be a huge amount of direct federal support, and this I'm reading from the bill, for the program.
Okay, I can't do it.
And if the states comply, they're going to get this money, and there's going to be temptation by the states to get this money, realizing they need it. And yet, when you go to look, and I say to the gentlelady, if you look at different, you have such a diverse geographical and climate region. You have single families versus multi-families, and commercial buildings versus single occupant commercial buildings. I think it's just a nightmare, and I'm afraid the states are going to not see this, and so I don't want to have them tempted because of federal subsidies for this program.
Time has expired. Any further debate on this amendment? Gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I certainly support the gentleman from Florida's amendment. I haven't completely read all of Section 204, but if what the information has been presented is accurate, it would seem to me that if you had a labeling requirement for residential and commercial, both the homes and buildings, it should be on new construction. And it should hold harmless existing construction for the very reason that Representative Stearns has outlined, and for the very reason that the real estate agents across this country are opposed to this part of the bill. You can, with all due respect to the gentlewoman from California, I think we, at our own peril, dismiss the opinion of the realtors in this situation, and I think that again, going forward on new construction, it makes sense, but on existing, you certainly can encourage. And when people are in the market to buy a commercial building or a home, generally they're going to have someone that's going to advise them about a lot of things about the building, how the heating, ventilation, air conditioning system works, and does it need a new roof, and is there any evidence of termites, and also if the building is energy efficient or not. And so I think we already have pretty well protected the consumer in that regard. And there are incentives that exist for existing buildings to get tax breaks for upgrading, whether it's windows or what, low water flush toilets and things that would incentivize people to be environmentally friendly and to do the right thing. But I mean, this labeling, I think, is dangerous. I will say to the majority, if you feel that a label is important, then why didn't we accept the Blackburn amendment yesterday, which would put a label on your utility bill and tell consumers, in the interest of transparency, how much this new cap and trade in Title III is causing them to pay in regard to increased utility bills. So labeling's not good for that, but it's good for the other. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Gentleman yield.
I'll be glad to yield.
Well, this labeling is going to be very helpful for the consumers because they can do something about making their homes more energy efficient. And there's some information that would be valuable because they know they can save money if they make changes that may not even cost all that much. So I think to strike this whole section doesn't really make sense. It's a voluntary one. Consumers could get useful information, And I think people would want to know that information.
Well, reclaiming my time, Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, I just simply disagree with you, and I think we should strike the section. I think it's a bad idea. Somebody just came up with a bad idea. They thought they had a good idea, but when you look at it, as Mr. Stearns has and the realtors have, that the unintended consequences far outweigh any good. And for that reason, I fully support this amendment. And with that,
Mr. Gentleman from Georgia, would you yield the balance?
I'll be happy to yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from Florida.
I just want to tell my colleagues, Mr. Markey says it's voluntary. Reading from the bill on page 280, there are an authorization of $50 million to the EPA administrator to implement this bill, and then the Secretary of Energy gets $20 million. So together, this program is a $70 million program. Now, in the short amount of time, I want to ask counsel, when they talk about putting a label on every house in America with a star, can you describe to me what this star label looks like? Is it going to be the size of a fist? Is it going to be the size of a tire? Tell me a little bit about what this label would look like. Is it going to be so that you can see it from the road, can see it from the highway, or do you have to get up very close to see this star energy label?
First, there's nothing in this section that directly requires us to be an Energy Star label. This is a separate program from the Energy Star program. The design, contents, appearance, placement of the label is entirely up to the process that is set up for the EPA to study it, to look at how many different building types are.
So we could have 50 states have 50 separate star labelings on the houses, whether it's a historical, commercial building, multifamily, single family. So EPA will establish this, but each state will have the right. Will the state decide on what this star label on your home looks like, or will it be each state?
The way I think the program is intended to work is that EPA would design a prototype label, explain how it is to work, use DOE data on building type consumption to.
Last question, Mr. Chairman, for the council. Who decides where this label is going to go? On the front door, on the window, the back door, the chimney? Where is this label going to go?
It's not in the statute, so that too would be up to administrative discretion and suggestions. Because it's a voluntary program, the states would certainly be able to
but
place the label.
$70 million.
Gentleman's time has expired. In the opinion of the chair, we've had a very good debate on this amendment. I think members understand it. Let's proceed to the vote. All those in favor of the Stern amendment say aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
No.
No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I ask a roll call vote.
You want a roll call vote? Let's go to a roll call vote.
I like to hear people's talk.
Mr. Waxman? Mr. Waxman, no. Mr. Dingle? No. Mr. Dingle votes no. Mr. Markey? No. Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Boucher? Mr. Pallone? Mr. Gordon? Mr. Rush? Ms. Eshoo? Ms. Eshoo, no. Mr. Stupak? Mr. Engel? No. Mr. Engel votes no. Mr. Green? Ms. DeGette? No. Ms. DeGette, no. Mrs. Capps? No. Mrs. Capps votes no. Mr. Doyle?
No.
Mr. Doyle, no. Ms. Harmon?
No.
Ms. Harmon, no. Ms. Schakowsky?
No.
Ms. Schakowsky votes no. Mr. Gonzalez?
No.
Mr. Gonzalez votes no. Mr. Inslee?
No.
Mr. Inslee, no. Ms. Baldwin? Ms. Baldwin votes no.
He should get that.
Mr. Ross? Mr. Weiner? Mr. Weiner votes no. Mr. Matheson? Mr. Butterfield?
No.
Mr. Butterfield, no. Mr. Melanson? Mr. Melanson votes aye. Mr. Barrow. Mr. Barrow votes aye. Mr. Hill. Ms. Matsui. Ms. Matsui votes no. Mrs. Christensen. Mrs. Christensen votes no. Ms. Castor. Ms. Castor votes no. Mr. Sarbanes. Mr. Sarbanes votes no. Mr. Murphy of Connecticut. Mr. Space. Mr. Space passes. Mr. McNerney. Mr. McNerney, aye. Ms. Sutter. Ms. Sutter, aye. I'm sorry. Ms. Sutton, aye. No. We're all falling asleep here. Mr. Braley. Mr. Welch. Mr. Barton. Mr. Barton votes aye. Mr. Hall. Mr. Upton. Mr. Upton, aye. Mr. Stearns. Mr. Stearns, aye. Mr. Deal. Mr. Deal, aye. Mr. Whitfield. Mr. Whitfield votes aye. Mr. Shimkus. Mr. Shimkus, aye. Mr. Shattuck. Mr. Shattuck votes aye. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Boyer. Mr. Boyer, aye. Mr. Radonovich. Mr. Radonovich, aye. Mr. Pitts. Mr. Pitts, aye. Ms. Bono-Mack. Ms. Bono-Mack, aye. Mr. Walden. Mr. Walden, aye. Mr. Terry. Mr. Terry, aye. Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, aye. Mrs. Myrick. Mrs. Myrick, aye. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, aye. Mr. Murphy of Pennsylvania. Mr. Murphy, aye. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess votes aye. Ms. Blackburn. Ms. Blackburn, aye. Mr. Gingrey. Mr. Gingrey, aye. Mr. Scalise. Mr. Scalise, aye. Mr. Hall. Mr. Hall votes aye. Mr. Boucher. Mr. Boucher votes no. Mr. Stupak. No. Mr. Stupak votes no. Mr. Pallone. No. Mr. Pallone votes no. Mr. Green.
No.
Mr. Green votes no. Mr. Ross. Aye. Mr. Ross votes aye. Mr. Rush. No. Mr. Rush votes no. Mr. Gordon here. Mr. Matheson. Mr. Matheson votes no.
Have all members?
No.
Mr. Hill? Mr. Hill votes no.
Murphy over here.
Mr. Gordon? Mr. Gordon votes no.
Mr. Murphy, have you been recorded?
Hold on. Mr. Space votes no. I'm sorry, Mr. Murphy votes no. You want to change your vote? Okay, off of pass on. I'm sorry, he passed, that's right.
All members responded to the call of the roll. Any member on the Republican side wish to change his or her vote, or the Democratic side? If not, let's tally the votes.
Justine, I asked her to bring two.
On that vote, Mr. Chairman, the ayes were 27 and the nays were 29.
27 ayes, 29 noes. The amendment's not agreed to.